Hello, my name is Loren Williams, and I'm a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And I run the Center for the Origin of Life, which is funded by NASA, which allows us to think about some very, very interesting questions. One of the things I really love about science and being a scientist is that we get to work with people from all over the world. This is my center at Georgia Tech, and you can see there are members of the center from the U.S. I have many Americans in the center, of course, but I have researchers from Mexico, Iran, India, Japan, Russia, Bulgaria, Egypt, Spain, and Israel. It just makes it so much fun to work with people from all over the world. This is one of the really rewarding things about being a scientist. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got to be a scientist. I was actually very lucky. I was an undergraduate at the University of Washington, and I was not such a great student. I was an okay student, but not a great student. And I was at a jazz concert, and I saw my physical chemistry professor at the jazz concert, Martin Guterman, Professor Guterman. I saw him at this jazz concert, and I was so taken by that. I talked to him, and he told me how much he loved jazz. And I thought for a while, and I just said, I want to work for that guy. So I saw him in the chemistry department at the University of Washington a few days later, and I asked him if I could work for him. And he said, let me think about it. And then I think he went and he looked up my grades, and he came back and he said, no, you can't work for me. So that was that. But about a week later, I don't know what happened really, but I was walking down the hallway, and he approached me and he said, do you still want to work in my lab? And I was like, yes. And he said, okay, you're welcome. So I joined his group, and this is Martin's research group. Actually, we're going on a hike on Mount Rainier. Martin loved jazz, but he also loved hiking. And it was just so wonderful working for Martin. This is what really led me to gain the confidence to think that I could do research and that I could do independent research. So from Martin's group, I went to graduate school, and then I did a postdoc, and it was all just a lot of fun. I enjoyed all of it, and I still enjoy it. This is me when I was an undergraduate at the University of Washington. I don't look like that anymore. So in our lab, we think about life. What is life? We don't really know what life is. I have to tell you, we don't really have a good answer. Maybe it's just chemistry, but it's very complicated chemistry. We don't have a definition of life, but we can still think about it and think about where it came from. Like this bird. Where did those feathers come from? Where did the beak come from? How did this bird come to be? That's the kind of thing we think about at my center at Georgia Tech. And we think about metabolism. This is one of the ways we draw metabolism. You can see it's very complicated. This, you could say, is how energy flows and how molecules are transformed in biology. It's just, you can just see by this. It's just very complicated. Where did this come from? How did this happen? This kind of complexity, you only see it in biology. You don't see this anywhere else. You only see this in biology. Where did this come from? How did this happen? And then when we look at molecules, molecules of biology are just fantastic. I mean, biology is a builder. It constructs massive, complicated molecules of many different kinds of things. RNA and protein and DNA and polysaccharide all come together to make fantastical structures. So how did this happen? That's what we really want to try to understand. How did this happen? I don't know if we'll ever really understand it, but we're going to understand part of it. We are making some progress, slowly. So let's think about us humans. Thousands of years ago, we started building buildings. And our ancestors were really not that good at building buildings. They didn't know how to build a freestanding building, so the way they built things, they carved them out of stone. Like this is an ancient building, you could say, in India, from before people knew how to build freestanding buildings very well. So it's a pretty good job here. They did carving this. This is just carved right out of the rock. But we don't do that anymore, right? We build much more complicated buildings than this. And so this is a way to think about biology. Biology has moved incrementally. Humans slowly learned how to build buildings. And biology is the same thing. It slowly learns how to do something, and once it learns, it doesn't forget. And then it, just like, humans learned how to carve rock, they didn't forget. And then they maybe learned about concrete, and they learned about steel reinforced concrete, and every step takes you to a new place, but you don't forget the old steps. That's the way biology works. So on the far right of this timeline is here and now. As we move to the left, we're progressing 1 million years. 1 million years is a long time. And our lifetimes are much shorter than 1 million years, obviously. But our ancestors have been around for a very, very long time. So the first human beings, which we call Homo sapiens, walked the planet around 200,000 years ago. But our ancestors before that, the ancestors of human beings, started using tools over 300,000 years ago. And the first Neanderthals are our cousins. They were walking the earth around 400,000 years ago. Now let's step back and look at 10 million years. So we're looking 10 times the distance here. So on the far right, that's here and now. And then on the far left, that's 10 million years ago. So about 1.5 million years ago, our ancestors started to use fire. We have evidence that they were using fires. Over 5 million years ago, our ancestors started walking erect. And over 8 million years ago was the last common ancestor of the human and the chimpanzee. So this is what has happened to humans over the last 10 million years. Now let's take another step back and look over 10 million years. Let's look over 100 million years. Some very important things happened. The first equine, that means the first horse, was over 50 million years ago. It didn't really look like a horse. I mean, it looked like a horse, but it was the size of a small dog. We have good fossils of those tiny little horse-like ancestors. But something that very important happened 65 million years ago. A large meteorite struck the Earth and killed all the dinosaurs. If that had not happened, we would not be here, because the death of the dinosaurs created an opportunity for a new kind of advanced life, and that was mammals. And mammals led to primates, primates led to us. So the extinction of the dinosaur was absolutely necessary for the rise of human beings. But I said something not quite right. All the dinosaurs did not go extinct. There were some left. And those are birds. So when you look at a bird, you're looking at a dinosaur. We know for a fact that birds are dinosaurs. So now let's step back again. Now we'll go from 100 million to 1 billion years. What happened over 1 billion years? And then we're still talking about our ancestors. So over 400 million years ago, a fish walked out of the water very slowly and walked on land. That was the beginning of what we call tetrapods. Those are things with 4 limbs. That includes horses, dinosaurs, and humans. So that fish, that's the ancestor of all of that. But not too long before that, on this scale anyway, about 500 million years ago were the first animals. They were very primitive animals. Those were the first animals. Before that, there was microbes, there was other kinds of life, but there were no animals. Now let's step back again. We can't step back to 10 billion years ago because the Earth isn't that old. We can only go back to about 4 billion years. Now let's look and see some things that were very, very important in the story of humans. One was called the Great Oxidation Event. The Earth rusted. Oxygen was produced by photosynthesis, and that literally rusted the Earth. The iron turned red, fell out of the ocean. Many life forms died because they could not adapt to oxygen. The Great Oxidation Event was a huge, huge transformation of our planet. And that was caused really by photosynthesis, which had started over 3 billion years ago. So all that photosynthesis slowly built up oxygen, ultimately oxidized the Earth. And around, we don't really know quite when, but approaching 4 billion years ago was the origin of life. And for the first billion years or so, maybe even longer, it was just microbes. In fact, it's been called the boring billions. I guess if you like microbes, it's not boring, but if you're interested in plants and animals, the first couple billion years of the Earth was pretty boring. When you step beyond that, we can see that oceans formed at about 4.3 billion years ago. There was something called the moon forming impact, a really large, it was about the size of Mars, crashed into the Earth, liquefied it, just made a horrible mess, and spun off some goo that slowly cooled and became the moon. So that was about 4.5 billion years ago. So those are some things that have had a big influence on you, whether you know them or not. If that planet had not struck the Earth, we wouldn't have a moon. If microbes had not figured out how to do photosynthesis, we wouldn't have oxygen. If we didn't have oxygen, we wouldn't be here. If that asteroid at 65 million years had not struck the Earth, wiped out the dinosaurs, we wouldn't be here. So we have a lot of good fortune along this complicated path of life on Earth that allowed us to be here and now. Okay, so how do I know these things? Am I making this up? You might think I'm making this up. I'm not making it up. We know a lot about deep history. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how we know about history of the Earth and the history of the universe. One of the ways is through astronomy. When you look up at the night sky, you are looking into the past. The light that is reaching your eye has been traveling for a very long period of time, and the telescopes that NASA can now put up into the sky can see back over 10 billion years. So this is a very long time. I mean, the universe is not that much older. These telescopes can see back almost to the beginning of the universe. They can't see the Big Bang, but they can see approaching the Big Bang. So that's one of the ways we know about deep history is this is the Webb telescope that is up there. Maybe you've read about this or heard about it. This thing is looking far, far back in time and is helping us understand the origins of the universe and the evolution of planets and all kinds of the evolution of galaxies, all kinds of interesting things that are going on that it's watching. They happened a long time ago. This thing is looking back in time. Another way we can look back in time is the moon. The moon is kind of a time machine because once it cooled, it kind of stopped changing. The Earth, the Earth oxidized, the Earth has erosion, all kinds of things happen to the Earth. The moon is essentially constant. So all of these craters, this is a record of impacts. We don't have that record on the Earth, right? They get eroded away pretty much. But the moon has a very detailed record of things that have crashed into it. The moon also has a record of the geology of the ancient Earth because the moon has been constant and the minerals on the moon are the same as the minerals on the ancient Earth. Minerals on the present day Earth are quite a bit different than they used to be, and the moon is our time machine that allows us to understand the ancient Earth. Of course, we have fossils. So how do we know about the history of horses, that they were so small? Because we have a very, very detailed fossil record of the evolution of horses from the fossil record. We have some other kinds of fossils. We have fossils of microbes. Now, if you look on the right, these are called stromatolites. Stromatolites are these microbial mats that kind of pull minerals out of the ocean and they fossilize. So there are some extremely ancient fossils of stromatolites. These have been dated from 3.48 billion years ago. So we have fossils going far, far back, not to the origin of life, but pretty close. This is a really interesting thing we have, which is fossils of raindrops. These fossils are 2.7 billion years ago, and they are raindrops striking soft soil and making an imprint. And we can learn about the composition of the atmosphere, the density of the atmosphere, all sorts of things from the size and the shape of these raindrops. Okay, I told you about the history of the Earth and the great oxidation. When the Earth oxidized, it rusted. And it fell out of the ocean, and it formed these things called banded iron formations. You can see here on the left. So these things are a very detailed geological record of biology. So geology remembers biology. So what is happening as photosynthesis is producing oxygen. That oxygen is causing iron to precipitate out of the ocean, and then that is recorded in the geological record. So that's one of the ways we know about the history of biology. Here's another way. You're probably familiar with this. In wood, you can look at this tree and you can tell a lot of things about the weather. You can see between 1930 and 1944, the weather wasn't so good. There wasn't a lot of water. The bands are very close together. Between 1923 and 1930, those were good years. And then look at something crashed into this tree. I don't know what it was, but this tree suffered some trauma, and that trauma made a permanent record. Now the thing about wood is wood can last a long time. There is wood many, many thousands of years old, and we can work out the history of the weather in this wood. And of course there's fossilized trees that are millions of years old, and so we can look at the weather from millions of years ago in fossilized wood. So that's another way we can know about the past. And so this is a tree. As a biologist or as a biochemist, I love trees. Trees record history for it. This tree has recorded so much of its history. Every branch of this tree is like a record of its history. That is nearly permanent if this tree fossilizes. So molecules are the same way. Some of these molecules are very, very ancient, and they, just like a tree, retain their history. So that's one of the things we do in my lab. We read out the history of molecules because they retain their history just like wood does. So for example, molecules that are older than the Great Oxidation Event tend to interact with iron in a different way than molecules that are newer. So we have a very detailed record of biology from looking at molecules. Molecules tell us all kinds of great information about biology. There's just one more thing I want to talk about. When we think about biology and what is it, it's really all about water. You are mostly water. Not only are you composed of water, but water is a chemical that is involved in many, many reactions. In fact, it is the most reactive species inside of you. And so, for example, when your body makes, this top one is making protein, you take 2 amino acids and you squeeze out of water and you make a peptide bond. Ultimately, that peptide bond has to be broken. Everything that biology makes, it has to break. So later on, when it's time to break that bond, water gets pushed back in and you break the bond. So that's how you make and break peptide bonds, which is the making and degradation of protein. And the same is true for RNA and DNA. When you take 2 nucleotides and you want to make a bond between them, let's say to make DNA or RNA, you release a water molecule and you can make a polymer. When you want to break that polymer down, you have to put water back in and break it. And then the bottom one is cellulose, trees, wood. When you want to take glucose and hook 2 glucose molecules together to make cellulose, you release a water molecule and you link those 2 glucoses. And later on, when you want to bring it back the other way, everything that goes one way in biology has to go back the other way. You put water in. So water is, we say it's the medium of biology, but also it's the primary reagent. Biology is all about water. And I want you to think about water. When you look out your window in the morning, oftentimes you will see the world is wet. This is a picture of a windshield in Atlanta in the winter. But then when you wait a couple hours in the late afternoon, you'll see the windshield is dry. And the windshield gets wet and dry every day, wet and dry. And we call this wet-dry cycling. And here's a little schematic of it. The sun shines, dries things out, then water comes, gets them wet. Wet, dry, wet, dry. And so even without biology, water is being pushed and pulled and pushed and pulled on the surface of the earth. And we think this is one of the keys to the ignition of biology, which is how the geological, what we call geological processes were pulled into biology. The geological process is the wet-dry cycling, and the biological process is the chemistry of water. So wet-dry cycling, we believe, leads to this kind of chemistry. So this is where we come from. We come from a spinning planet with water condensing and evaporating. Biology can make some strange turns. On the left is the leg of an elephant, the skeletal leg of an elephant. And this is amazing because this thing is designed to carry weight, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen an elephant walk, but the leg of an elephant is pretty impressive. And guess what the origin of that leg is? It's the fin of a fish. So I told you, a fish first walked out of water and led to tetrapods, including elephants. So this is the kind of thing that evolution can do. It can do very creative things. It can make fish fins into elephant legs. It can make nerve nets into brains. Evolution is like a master of creation. And when you look out the window, you're seeing the product of 1 billion years of evolution. No, you're not. You're seeing the product of 4 billion years of evolution. This is a summary of your life in the broadest sense. When you want to think about your life, you have to think about the formation of the earth, the formation of the moon. When did oceans form? When did land form? The origin of life. Photosynthesis was huge. That created oxygen. Without oxygen, there'd be no mammals. There'd be nothing like us could exist in the absence of oxygen. So this is the story of your life right here. So thank you for listening to me. I do want to go back to my roots, which is Martin Guterman, who allowed me in the door of science and gave me so many great opportunities. So thank you very much.